Hi, everyone. This week we're going to talk about Islam. Islam is an Arabic word that means submission, and the word Muslim is the participial form of the verb to submit, and it means one who submits. So Muslims are those who submit to Islam, the religion of submission, as it was revealed to the Prophet Muhammad by God. First, a little historical background. In the early 7th century, some inhabitants of the Arabian Peninsula accepted a wide variety of religions. There were some Jews who lived there. There were some Christians of various sorts, including what would be considered by the majority of Christians to be unorthodox Christians, in other words, monophysites and Nestorian Christians. There were Zoroastrians who lived in the Arabian Peninsula, and of course, there were a lot of polytheists who practiced the traditional Arab religion. The traditional Arab religion included the worship of spirits associated with natural features, stones, trees, so forth. It also included the belief in jinn, Jinn, what we call in English genies, from, we think of the story of Aladdin and his magic lamp. Well, that's a story that reflects this belief in these spiritual beings that could either help or harm humans, but they could also inspire poets and diviners. The traditional Arabian religion also recognized a range of higher gods, including a god named Allah. Now, Allah is the Arabic word that can be just translated as God. It's used as the name of God, just like in English, people who are Jews or Christians might say God is blah, 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 and we're using it as though that were God's name. Same thing for Muslims. They can say God if they want to translate it, or they can say Allah. Allah, the word Allah in Arabic is related etymologically to the Hebrew words El and Elohim. All right. So Allah was one of the gods who was worshipped. In fact, he was considered to be the head of a pantheon of gods that were worshipped by the Arabs. He wasn't a particularly significant god, although he did have, even though he was the head of the pantheon, there were other gods who were perhaps more significant to many Arabs. But he did have a sanctuary, Allah did, in Mecca. The sanctuary that's in Mecca is called the Kaaba, and Mecca was an important city on the caravan route between Yemen in the south and the Byzantine Empire and the Persian Empire in the north. So it was an important city and if you worked in the trade business, Mecca might be a place that you would work. And in fact, that's exactly what Muhammad did earlier in his life. Was he worked as a trader. So Muhammad was born in the year 570 in Mecca. He was a member of a tribe called the Quraysh. His father died before he was born, and his mother died when he was a young child. So he was raised by first his grandfather, and then after his grandfather died, he was raised by his uncle. When he was 25 years old, Muhammad married a woman named Khadija, and write her name up here. So Muhammad was 25. Khadija was 40 at the time, so he married an older woman. And she was a wealthy widow who was in the caravan trade. And so Muhammad started working in the caravan trade. And they had several children together, but no other wives. Muhammad had no other wives. It was common practice in those days. And in some parts of the world, among Muslims, it's still common practice to have more than one wife. But while Khadija was still alive, Muhammad was married to her and had no other wives. When he was 40 years old, in the year 610, he began to have visions of an angel who revealed himself to Muhammad as the angel Jibril. And this is the same angel who is called Gabriel in Jewish and Christian traditions. So the angel Jibril said that he had messages from Allah, the chief Arabian god, and he revealed himself to Muhammad as the one true God. All the other gods that were worshipped in Arabia, he said, were not real gods. He was the one true God, and in fact, he was identical with the God who was worshipped by Jews and Christians. All right. So when he started getting these visions, Muhammad was afraid at first, but his wife Khadija assured him that this was legit. This really was an angel who was visiting him, and he had a Christian relative who also said, "Hey, I know who Jibril is, same as Gabriel. You need to listen to what he's saying to you." So Muhammad continued to receive visions from Jibril over the next several years, and Muhammad was illiterate, so he had to memorize the words. The words that Jibril was giving to Muhammad, he told him to memorize them and pass them on to his followers, whom he started to collect shortly after this. And since he was illiterate, he couldn't write them down, so he had to memorize them, and then his followers began memorizing these revelations. And these revelations were considered to be the actual literal words of Allah, the actual words of God. And so they were, very important. And this is what became the Quran, the sacred scriptures of Muslims today. Well, the first convert to Islam was Muhammad's wife Khadija, followed by his cousin Ali ibn Abi Talib, we'll just call him Ali, and also his friend Abu Bakr. So these were the first three converts to Islam, not counting Muhammad, of course. And his cousin Ali was the son of Muhammad's uncle who raised Muhammad. And Sunnis considered, his name was Abu Talib. Sunnis consider Abu Talib to be an unbeliever, whereas Shia Muslims, Sunnis and Shia are the two largest groups of Muslims. The Shia consider Abu Talib to be a faithful Muslim. So there's that disagreement between the two largest branches of Islam. So after Abu Talib died and Khadija died, they both died in the same year, 619. Muhammad had to look for another place to live. Abu Talib was the leader of his clan, the Hashemite clan, and he was offering protection to Muhammad. But after he died, Muhammad's position in Mecca became less tenable. He was preaching a new religion, and we've talked about reformers in the past. Their message is not always well received by those who are in power. And so he looked around, but he wasn't able to find anyone else who would offer him the protection that he needed. So a couple of years later, in 622, representatives from a city called Yathrib, a city that was 210 miles north of Mecca, they sent messengers to Muhammad, and they asked him to come as a mediator in a tribal dispute of some sort. And so Muhammad and most of his followers left Mecca at that point. And luckily he did, because he narrowly avoided an assassination attempt. Well, Muhammad and his followers fled north to the city of Yathrib, and this event is a very important event in Muslim history. It's called the Hijra, or sometimes you also see it called and spelled Hijira. All right. So the Hijra or the Hijira is the Arabic word that means immigration. It means, mass moving your home from one place to another. So they went to the city of Yathrib, and sure enough, Muhammad was able to solve the dispute, and eventually he became so popular that he began to rule Yathrib, and by this time Muhammad was considered a prophet, and people referred to him in his own lifetime as the prophet, and the name of the city was changed to the city of the prophet, from Yathrib to the city of the prophet, which in Arabic is Madinat al-Nabi, the city of the prophet, or just Medina for short. And so the city that is now known today as Medina was the city that Muhammad and his followers fled to in 622. And that year is very important because it's the first year of the Muslim calendar. So Jews have a calendar. They count the years from the date of creation as they've calculated it. Christians count their calendar from the birth of Christ, and Muslims count their calendar from the year of the Hijra. And so you see it abbreviated sometimes A.H. Which means in Latin Anno Hejire, the year of the Hijra, or immigration. Well, so Muhammad was in Medina, and he began to build up more and more followers, and the tribes converted to Islam, and he established a community that was based on common faith and commitment rather than heredity or geography. It didn't matter where you lived. It didn't matter what tribe you were in, so it kind of dissolved the tribal boundaries. At least that was the theory, and it was a religion that was based on a common faith. Okay, and so Muhammad and his followers began raiding caravans that were bound for Mecca in order to weaken the position of Mecca, because the rulers of Mecca still opposed Muhammad, but he wanted to go back there because it was the leading city in the region. And Muhammad and his followers got into battles with troops from Mecca over the years. Eventually, they agreed to a 10-year truce in the year 628 that allowed Muslims to make pilgrimages to Mecca, because remember, the Kaaba, the sanctuary of Allah, was there in Mecca, and Muslims wanted to visit it. So Muhammad continued to spread his message of Islam to surrounding tribes, and many were converted. And eventually, a few years later, 8 years after the Hijra, in the year 630, Muhammad was able to capture Mecca, which by this point had so many Muslims in it that they didn't really put up much of a fight. And so Muhammad became the ruler now of Mecca. And then other surrounding tribes continued to convert to Islam and pledge their allegiance both to Muhammad and to Islam. Pagan tribes were banned from pilgrimage to Mecca, and then Muhammad himself died in the year 632, 2 years after he was made the ruler of Mecca. Now, Muhammad had 7 children, 6 by Khadijah and 1 by a later wife called Maria the Copt, but all 7 of his children died before Muhammad, except for one, his daughter Fatima, who was married to Muhammad's cousin Ali. Now remember Ali, he's going to come back into the picture later. But she died only 2 months after Muhammad did. So Muhammad's dead, this great prophet. He was the leader of the community. Who's going to take up the mantle of leadership now that Muhammad has died? Well, most scholars believe that Muhammad did not name a successor. And of course, all Sunnis believe that he didn't name a successor. The Shia, or Shiites, believe that he had named Ali as his successor. We'll get to that in a minute. But the vast majority of Muslims believe that he hadn't named a successor. And so the community got together and chose a successor. And they appointed Abu Bakr, who was Muhammad's friend, to be the successor. And Abu Bakr. And the word for successor in Arabic is Caliph. All right, Caliph. So Abu Bakr was the first Caliph, the first successor to Muhammad. He only ruled for 2 years before his death. I should say about Abu Bakr also that he was Muhammad's friend, but he was also Muhammad's father-in-law. After Khadijah died, Muhammad married several women, one of whom was named Aisha, and Abu Bakr was Aisha's father. So after his 2 years of serving as the caliph, during that 2 years, many other tribes converted to Islam. And so by the time of Abu Bakr's death, essentially all the tribes in Arabia had converted to Islam. Well, Abu Bakr was succeeded by Umar. in the year 634, and Umar had been designated as Abu Bakr's successor, um, and he reigned for about 10 years. Under his rule, Muslim armies captured Syria, including Jerusalem, which before this time had been controlled by the Byzantine Empire, the Christians. So he captured, Umar captured Syria. He also captured Egypt. He also captured Iraq and parts of Iran from the Sasanian Empire. And so the Muslim movement was spreading by conquest throughout that part of the world. Umar was eventually assassinated after 10 years. He was assassinated by a Persian slave, and he was succeeded by Uthman. Right. Uthman ruled as caliph for 12 years. He was a member of a clan called the Umayyad clan, and this clan was one of the last to convert to Islam during Muhammad's lifetime. But Uthman was a very, very significant ruler. He did a couple of things. Number one, he's the one who led to the final conquest of the Sasanian Empire. This is the last iteration of the Persian Empire in the year 651. And after his conquest of the Persian Empire, Persia and Persians, the majority of Persians anyways, slowly began to convert to Islam. Remember that when the Muslims conquered, they didn't force people at the point of the sword to convert, usually. But they did offer some strong incentives like tax relief and, if you wanted to serve in government and so forth, you often had to be a Muslim, although that's not 100% true across the board, but that's another story. At any rate, Uthman, another thing that he did that was very significant, it was during his reign as caliph that the Quran was written down and made authoritative for the first time. There were different versions. Other people had written down all or parts of the Quran, but Uthman chose one particular version and destroyed all the others, the ones that differed from it. There were differing versions of the Quran, slightly different versions. Uthman got rid of the variant versions and said, this is the official version, it's the only one that can be copied. Now, a few manuscripts of the Quran with variants in them have survived to the present day. Not very many, but, and this is thanks in large part to Uthman. And also the Quran didn't have a long transmission history to be copied the way the Jewish Bible, the Christian Bible, the Christian New Testament had before it was more or less standardized. Another difference with the Quran versus the sacred texts of Christians and Jews and Zoroastrians for that matter is that the Quran was considered to be literally the words of God. There are some Jewish traditions that see the Torah, the first 5 books, as the words that God delivered to Moses, but most Jews don't see that. They might say the law was, or the 10 Commandments, or something like that. But for Muslims, every last word of the Quran is considered to be the literal words of God. Okay, so after Uthman died during a war, Muslims who lived in Medina, they chose Ali. Remember Ali? Muhammad's cousin and also son-in-law, because he married Muhammad's daughter Fatima. They chose Ali. Now, there was a group of Muslims who always considered Ali to have been the real successor, and they said, oh, finally, the rest of the community recognizes what we've always known, that it should be someone in Muhammad's family who is the leader of Islam. And so the larger community agreed, and they chose Ali to be the new caliph. And he only reigned for 5 years as the caliph before he was assassinated. There were a lot of assassinations early on in Islam. So Aisha was Muhammad's youngest and favorite wife after Khadijah died. And she was very influential in the development of early Islam. And when Uthman was assassinated or was killed, she she wanted Ali, the new leader, to take vengeance on those who had killed him, but Ali either was unable or unwilling to do it. It's hard to say. And so she got somebody from a different clan, the Umayyad clan, that is Uthman's clan, to take vengeance on his killers. And then after Ali was killed, the larger community nominated a man by the name of Muawiyah to be the next caliph. Now, these first four caliphs here are called the rightly guided caliphs, and they have a special place in Muslim history. All the successors after Ali, Muawiyah, and following were considered caliphs, but they were not the four rightly guided caliphs. Also, after Ali's death, a minority of Muslims who were called the Shia, they split off from the larger community, and they said, we think that somebody in Muhammad's family, the descendants of Muhammad and descendants of Ali, they are the true leaders of the community. Well, most of the Muslim community didn't agree with that, and so it was split now into the Sunni, who were the larger group, and the Shia, or Shiites, who were the smaller group. Under Muslim rule, we've talked about them expanding their territory. Under Muslim rule, Jews and Christians, for the most part, fared pretty well. They were identified in the Quran as people of the book, that is, people who had a set of scriptures that they referred to, just like the Muslims did. And even though they weren't considered to be faithful Muslims, of course, they were respected, and the Quran actually has a couple of verses that talk about honoring them and not doing violence to them and so forth. Within 2 or 3 centuries after the birth of Islam, Muslims had spread into Christian territory in North Africa, the Iberian Peninsula, that is modern-day Spain and Portugal, into Eastern Europe, into Anatolia, modern-day Turkey, and they had also spread east into India and Central Asia. So Islam was spreading quite rapidly during this time. Now let me say a little bit about the Quran. The revelations, as I said, from Allah from Jibril of Allah's words to Muhammad were passed down orally at first, but eventually they were written down and standardized under the caliphate of Uthman. And the words were divided into 114 chapters, or surahs, and it's arranged very simply from the largest, the longest surahs are first, all the way to the shortest, except for the very first one. The first one is introductory, it's very short. But the second is the longest surah, then the third is the next longest, and so forth. So it's not in chronological order. It's also not in any chronological order in terms of the actual revelations themselves. For Muslims, the study of the Quran must be done in Arabic. Obviously, there are translations, but translations into another language, they say, is an only imperfect guidance to the faithful. So one of the duties of good Muslims is to learn Arabic. And not every Muslim certainly knows Arabic, but it's strongly encouraged. Muslims are big believers in prophets, and in Muslim tradition, every prophet's message is confirmed by a miracle. And Muhammad's miracle was the production of the Quran. Muhammad is considered to be the last and greatest of the prophets in Islam. Their prophets go back, many of the prophets from the Hebrew Bible are included as prophets in Islam. Starting with Adam, including Noah and David and Daniel and Isaac and Ishmael. They also include prophets in Islam. Also include a guy named Yahya, that's John the Baptist, and Isa, which is the Arabic version of Jesus. So Jesus, Muslims believe, was born of a virgin, and he was a great prophet, but he was not part of the Trinity because he wasn't himself divine. Muslims also don't believe Muhammad was divine. In fact, it says in the Quran, Muhammad is speaking. He says, "I am a human being like you. It is revealed to me that your God is one God. Let him who hopes to meet his Lord do what is right and worship none beside him." All right, and so Muslims honor the prophets, and especially they honor Muhammad. In addition to the Quran, there are numerous other stories stories and accounts that collected Muhammad's words and his deeds, stories about him, stories about his followers, and these are called hadiths. And in the years following Muhammad's death, many of these hadiths were collected and written down. There were thousands of them, and eventually, within a couple of centuries, maybe 200,000 different hadiths. And how do you make sense of this many? Well, Islamic scholars got together and they classified the hadiths into three different levels of reliability. There are sound hadiths, that is, their teachings are sound, you can rely on them. There are good hadiths. They don't quite have the same level of assurance as the sound hadiths, but they're still pretty good. And then there are weak hadiths, those that don't have a lot of support, a lot of authority. With that, I think I'm going to stop this recording, and I'll come back and make another one for you.